So you're probably here because you are learning Webflow. I'm a Webflow guy and I've been making Webflow videos for the past year. I'm a developer and I've been developing for the last 10 years. I'm also very interested in no code and more specifically teaching the coding concepts around these no code tools, which again is probably a reason why you're here. Recently, I was introduced to a new no-code tool. Well, it was new to me. It's actually been around before Webflow. I think it was introduced in 2012, 2014, and that tool has been Pinegrow. You might have noticed a few videos going up recently about me exploring Pinegrow and just having fun with it, really, not really having any aim for the videos, just learning the tool. Pinegrow actually reached out to me shortly after I made those videos, and we've been talking since and trying to figure out what we could potentially do together to try and promote Pinegrow. Now, Pinegrow is a fantastic tool, but I see it as a tool. It's just another tool, just like Webflow. I look at the suite of products that are out there. I don't dedicate myself to any particular one because not one size fits all, unfortunately, with web development. My company makes a lot of apps, so that means we actually spend a lot of our time using React and various single-page application technologies to help build those dashboards, those products, those SaaS applications. So I recently sat down with Bob Means, who works with Pinegrow, and he works on various documentation, creating tutorials for them, and even dipping into a bit of programming every now and again to help improve the product. And during a Twitch stream, which you can find at twitch.tv/fakesamgregory, we actually discussed some of the issues that I was having in one of my first videos and various UX improvements, feature suggestions, and we just kind of got into the nitty gritty of what the future is of Pinegrow and actually just helping me out resolving some of the issues that I have. So I think it's a really interesting conversation just to kind of get an idea of Pinegrow, what they've kind of got coming up, and just some little tips and tricks that I picked up along my journey actually talking to Bob. We also get into a little bit of a discussion around kind of the web application that Webflow is and the native application that Pinegrow is. So if that sounds interesting to you, let me know if you want to hear more about Pinegrow, like various tutorials and things like that. If you're even using Pinegrow, because it certainly interests me. It's a lot more powerful. It goes a lot further than Webflow. But I'm yet to make a video on kind of my kind of where I am with my thinking when it comes to Webflow versus Pinegrow, if there is even a comparison between them. Sit back, relax. It's a podcast-esque episode, and just kind of listen to our conversation and learn all about Pinegrow. The easiest way to let me know that you like the content of this episode is to hit the like button. And if you want to support me and my teachings, then head on over to patreon.com/fakesamgregory, where you can support the channel for as little as £5 a month.
I came to Pinegrow as an enthusiast. I'm actually the opposite from you. I'm more of a back-end guy, and the front end scares me. Not from the technical aspects. I can manage the cascade. I can, I know all the minutia probably of the tags. It was more the design eye. It's more the typography, the colors, things like that. And for me, my enthusiasm about Pinegrow was that I could use my sort of more back-end technical knowledge to put together a page, and it helped me a little bit anyway with the design. But I completely agree with you. It's a tool. And one of my bits of enthusiasm for it is that it doesn't pigeonhole you into doing something its way. It gives you a little bit of freedom. However, I have to say, as a person who deals with customer service for Pinegrow, who fields people's questions, that's also what scares people the most. There's not a single way to do things. It's very forgiving of allowing you to manage your workflow how you want to manage it, but that's also very daunting for a lot of people.
Similar to Photoshop in a lot of ways. There's 3 different ways to do the same thing, and you choose your favorite way and you choose your workflow. But with that flexibility, with that amount of flexibility comes a lot of power and a lot of responsibility as well. So it's So to kind of get into the meat of why we're here. So I made that video, and I encountered a lot of issues, and that's where you guys kind of reached out and thought it'd be cool to address these issues, talk about these issues, because
Mhm.
I intentionally went into it not having really looked at some tutorials, because I'm a developer. I just want to play around with it and see how far I can get. I also feel like that's an interesting case study from a UX perspective of the developers of Pinegrow, which I openly welcomed their feedback and all the rest of it. So that's where we are now. And we
Right.
have a big old, well, not big old list, but we have a list of issues that we were having, suggestions
Mhm.
that I had made during that episode. And um, I think it would be an interesting conversation just to go through that list. So,
Sure.
do you have these in the same order that I had sent you them, or
Yeah, I have your list
nice?
pulled up here. So I have to say that we took, some good feedback from
Mm,
your earliest video, and we've actually already pushed out. So one of the things Pinegrow can do is there's both downloadable updates, but we also have an ability to push updates.
hmm.
So there's a live update that's running behind the scenes, and we've already pushed out a couple of UI UX changes from your first video.
That's awesome.
So as we go through the list, I'll kind of point out a couple of those where we've already made some changes.
Mm,
Um,
that's
so one
awesome.
of the first things that you brought up is that so Pinegrow allows you, for people who maybe haven't seen the videos, Pinegrow allows you to open a number of different basic framework templates. So it includes Bootstrap, it includes Tailwind. There's a couple of lesser well-known ones like Angular, Materialize, but it also allows you, if you desire, to pull up a plain HTML, very, very basic template. So, basically just a little bit of your head information with some meta tags you can fill in, a title you can fill in, and not a lot else. And one of
Mm,
the things that you had brought up is it would be good to have a normalize built in.
mm,
And we sort of have been debating about that for a little while. Um, Again, Pinegrow doesn't like to pigeonhole or place too much opinion onto people as far as what they want to load. And while there is, the most famous of normalization CSS files, we kind of wanted to give people the option. But what we've decided now, and we're still waffling back and forth, is are we going to have, so the other thing that Pinegrow can do is under one of the menus, you can load in resources. And we're thinking of offering a normalized CSS either as a resource or as a separate template. So in other words, when you bring up the original framework menu, the modal, you can either pull in just a very plain HTML template or an HTML template that already has that normalized CSS attached to it. And we're sort of, it always comes down to how much effort you think or how much burden you think you're placing on users.
mm.
If somebody has to, in order to get that normalized on the page, navigate through a couple of different menus, then click attach and something like that, is that unduly burdensome? Should it just be a separate template? And of course, for us, it's a heck of a lot easier to maintain as a separate
Mm,
template. So, but
mm,
we do envision that going forward, that's probably going to be in the next version that we release,
mm.
that ability.
Because of course there's not just normalize, there's actually reset CSS as well. So I
Right.
mean, you're really splitting hairs when you talk about, oh, I'm a normalized person or a reset CSS person. But
Exactly. Yeah.
would you be allowing those separate reset libraries as part of that workflow, or is it just normalize that you're going with? So I think
So, I
normalize is
mean,
the newer one. I think normalize is the
yeah,
more recent
normalizes the new
version.
one.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I have to say is, up to now, I've done more software as a service of more like smaller specialized software pieces. And when you
mm,
get into something like Pinegrow, one thing that I'm starting to appreciate with these web apps is, or it's standalone, but sort of a web
yeah.
app, is that, you have to be careful about the technical debt that you accumulate. The more features you add, the more time you're going to have to spend supporting those in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Pinegrow, it's really easy to go ahead within that package that we distribute to put in as many resources as we want. I mean, to be completely honest with you, I don't think we've had the discussion about that, about, normalize versus reset versus give the user the ability to choose either.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Cause I mean,
that's something within the technical ability.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, all it is a line of HTML to say bring in that thing. So
Right.
it's just a minor head start. I guess the reason why I thought of it is because in my original video, it was a simple thing. It was like margins at the top and the side, and that stuff is built in by the browser, and Normalize kind of tends to get rid of that or whatever. And there's probably a line item in here somewhere about actually on the right hand side, the style panel, there is margins that has been added, but you're not seeing any margins in the styling panel. So I just felt a bit confused about it wasn't clear where those margins and paddings came from. I think I just went to the HTML because as a web developer, I'm lazy. I bring in Normalize, don't really think about it. It sounds simple, but you forget, does it go on the body or does it go on the HTML? So I was like, sure. HTML margin 0, 0 didn't work. Body, there it is. Yeah. Those sorts of things. I think that it's a twofold kind of problem. And again, I think there's a line item seeing those default values in the style editor versus knowing that you've done something or there is something already removing those weird things that no one ever wants anyway, because that's why Normalize was invented, I guess. So, well, it would be interesting to see because, of course, when you go in that menu, you go plain HTML, and there's only one item in that thing. So just have another one in there that says Normalizes. It wouldn't be too much of a burden sort of visually as adding one extra item. So look forward to that. That's cool. This is a big one, I think. This is one of the biggest things that I feel like from a UX perspective, I feel like Pinegrow lets me down and hurts my workflow the most. And that's the contextual menus. And to put a bit of context to this is that I was seeing things like flex container, grid items. I could modify the grid thing. And thinking about your original comment around adding burden and essentially these tools walking a fine line between limiting and providing accessible tool, of course you might want to go into a flex child and set the styling of a child before you go to the parent, right?
Right.
Of course, as a developer, you might want to choose to do that. That just might be the way your brain works. However, I was getting, it adds to that list of styling properties when I see lots there, and I'm seeing flex attributes being given to me, but I've not set anything, the parent or whatever, to style flex.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of context, and I'm guessing that you've prepared a well-articulated answer. I'm just guessing.
No, this is actually something that I've also commented on previously, and I'll be truthful with you. The reason why things are in the order that they're in within the styles panel, the reason why things sort of maybe aren't as responsive, I guess, for lack of a better word, as you would expect, is, as much as we'd like to pat ourselves on the back, us thinking we want to give people the flexibility that if they think flex child first, then parent flex item, then, whatever. As much as that's a little bit in the philosophy, I think, to be completely honest with you, if you look at the evolution of Pinegrow from first version to current version, basically, again, rather than going back and rehashing earlier code necessarily, some of those controls like flex, like grid, were sort of tacked on, right?
Yeah.
When those actual CSS specs were approved. So, Pinegrow like sort of predated some of those, and you
Mm.
had this certain set of styles. And when those came on board as a popularly supported CSS set of stylings, those kind of got tagged on the end. And prior to your video, Matcha's been working quite a bit, sort of the head of Pinegrow, the head programmer, has been working quite a bit on redesigning sort of the styling input. And actually, there's a couple of different. I'm pointing over here like everybody knows what's over here, but your list of points is on my screen over here, and he's actually been working on addressing some of these points and had been working on them, and sort of putting together a slightly updated styles panel that is going to at least partially address some of the things that you were talking about. And again, we're wrestling with, we always want to keep Pinegrow slightly non-opinionated.
Yeah.
Even if that does give users a little bit of head bending when they first start using it. But yeah, we were aware of, issues like that.
Yeah, because I think it's just it's overwhelming, and we're moving into a world of what like Netflix bringing together all of your movies. Curation is the word I was looking for. We're in a world of like curation and things and technology thinking one or two steps ahead of us, and I think it would be interesting. I mean, Pinegrow. I'm not sure how big the team is. You mentioned last week, how big is the team of developers at Pinegrow?
I would say that really there's two people that are really core to the development, and then there's the rest of us that are doing things like building templates, building the blocks that are seen in Pinegrow. Just recently, one new person was brought on board to do some more development, to bring in some specific features. And then, there's a team of us that are involved in product support and running the support desk, running the forums, putting out documentation.
Yeah. So, I mean, a slightly larger group of people helping support the app with the features that are already there, but an even smaller team actually progressing and building on top of the app. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty small team, relatively speaking. Like Webflow is.
Exactly right. It's going to be massive, and given a larger team and all the rest of it, I'm sure like an interesting experiment to try would be to try out our new let's use a buzzword of AI. Try out our AI interface where it is a bit more predictive. It's a bit more fluid in terms of only presenting to you flex options when you set the parent to be flex. Various things like that. Minimizing that interface, because again, I've had small tweets and comments on my videos saying, a lot of people find it daunting, and I know a lot of these people are coming from Webflow and are, to your point about the daunting aspect of UI, a lot of them are designers now able to do development. They're not quite as well versed in a lot of these things. But it would be interesting to try. And of course, that sounds like a lot of work for a small team. But I think personally, it would make my workflow a bit faster, because I'm not then scrolling all the way down to the bottom of the styles list and looking at I mean, again, there's a point in here somewhere about the more visual interface, but looking at lots of text boxes isn't giving me a lot of visual cues for things. So it would be interesting to see. Obviously, a difficult one to attack, but certainly an option I think many would probably find, would welcome. I can imagine equal amounts of people hating that and wanting that control, wanting that power. Developers especially, they want to know where things are. They grow muscle memory in certain things. They're more logical in that respect. So maybe something for the future, but it's I can imagine you guys are debating over it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're currently improving. Like if you drop down, so further down in your list, you have a couple of things about default values being pre-filled, adding things like pixels to the end rather than the user having to add them themselves. One thing that's definitely being incorporated, you also say that a drop down so that you can select the values, like if you want pixel, if you want rem, m, whatever. Those are all definitely something that's going to be in the future styles panel. And I think you're right. That's something that we've been talking about for a while as being needed, and being able to increase people's workflow without at the same time being opinionated, rather than saying it has to be pixels. If you have a drop down there that allows you to pick a couple of different ones, I think that's good.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been advocating for, just dropping back for a second to address one of the points you made, one of the things that I've been advocating for as far as Pinegrow and trying to push as far as Pinegrow, and again, I do work for the company, but I'm trying not to be an evangelist for this is the be all end all. Is the one thing that I don't know, kind of like about it is that if you are not a front end person, if you are a visual front end person, but not necessarily a person who knows, I think you brought up one of the things was, like your font color, what the exact CSS property is there, right? The thing that I like is right above the settings panel, the lower visual editor, there's a box that shows you the actual rules you're building. And I know if you're on a deadline, you don't want to be staring at that box at the same time you're doing other things. But I think it's a great tool for learning, when I do this is how it translates over to my style sheet.
I agree with that, actually. Yeah.
I'm kind of advocating that it's almost a really good tool to learn HTML and CSS from a coding perspective, because you just have access to the code at the same time that you are able to build visually. I kind of like that.
So one of my points was around, I was in the boxed shadow. I think I was stuck for an embarrassingly long amount of time, that I think I put in the color or something. And what Webflow would do is, if you put in the color, obviously you're going to want to fill in the rest of this information here. And I put in the color and I was like, why isn't that box shadow coming up? And then I was like, because I've not put in, I think I put X and Y, but I didn't put in distance or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, it's being, I don't know whether this, this enters this debate of giving too much power, too little power, all the rest of it. But it's being that one or two steps ahead that I think Pinegrow could benefit from, by knowing that, of course, if I'm putting color in, then I'm going to want to fill these in, and then prompts you to fill those in. Developers are just as lazy as the rest of us, right? And I feel like once you get so, it sounds crazy, but if I'm typing the code, I know full well what the values need to be. But when my mind, this could just be me now, by the way, but when I'm in the context of this visual editor, I'm wanting it to take a step for me. I'm wanting it to kind of just fill things out for me, help me out a little bit. Again, that's probably a user research question rather than just taking my word for it as the gospel. But it sounds like you've had a few conversations around that sort of process, right?
Yeah. The other thing, I don't know, paradoxically or not, around this exact thing is, you notice over to the right there is that whole dial thing that allows you to enter an angle. And that actually, if you're not, you really have to wrap your mind around the different settings for a box shadow, because as you move that angle, it changes your X, your Y, your distance. It's changing all sorts of things. And if you drop back and do the math, it makes perfect sense. And if you just are used to doing it visually using that angle finder, it's great. But if you are thinking about the code, thinking about what you want your exact values to be. I've had a number of users that have a real hard time between, what that ends up spitting out and, what the values are that get entered into the box. So yeah, that's another area of user experience that we have to take a look at. The other thing that comes up with this one, I don't think you brought it up, but I've had users bring up that we're wrestling with is if you look at type, right? Box shadow of none. So in this context, this X right here kind of makes sense. Clicking on it means you're going to turn that box shadow sort of off, right? But there's other contexts, for example, here, right? Within the border, you see this X, and from many people's user experience, if you have something like, 2 pixels here, black, and, you set all of them to that, right? You would think that clicking, first of all, I don't have anything selected, but first of all, you would think that it would pop up a 2 pix wide black border. But the thing is, this X doesn't actually mean zero this out. It just means don't show anything, right? And
got you.
It's the making sure that the consistency is there, that an X always means get rid of, or an X always means is something that I think is also something we need to improve on and need to, rather than having this maybe as a default of don't show whether it's solid or dashed or dotted, instead of it always defaulted to, solid, I think people would maybe have a little bit easier time with it. Something like that,
Yeah. That was, I edited my video and I was stuck on that specific border thing for an embarrassingly long amount of time. My video that went out was like, it trimmed it down, but I was because I could not see that. I didn't understand the X. But to your point about the consistency of what these different symbols mean and what they do, I can understand that being a real mind F, because it's, you kind of expected to do different things in different scenarios. And I guess user testing is the only way to kind of get around that, but can sympathize with that difficulty. Yeah.
It's just a lot of code to, definitely A/B test to make sure that it has the impact that you expect and not a detrimental impact.
Yeah, for sure. So, to wrap up on that question, because we said a few things. So with the box shadow and pre-filling these things out, that's just an ongoing discussion. That's something you're considering, is it? And all the rest of it. So tooltips on hover of the icons I've got as my next note.
So actually, if you actually do hover, it's just a little bit slower than you would like it to be. Yeah, it's there, but usually people they hover, they're like, where is it? And then they move on to the next one. So that's something that we're also, again, it's one of those things where experienced users are like, get these damn tooltips out of my way. And people who are newer to it, we have that problem, especially with different pop-up notices, where we think it's, useful to tell a user something. But a lot of, experienced users are like, okay, this is the 7th time I've seen this. I know this is going to happen. Please stop it. And trying to get that balance of, is something that, we've been struggling with as well.
I mean, maybe it's the first 7 times. I don't know why I said 7. Maybe it's the first 7 times. It's 0.2 of a second, but after the 8th time, then it's the second. It's okay. So I'm just being impatient.
No, you are not the only one.
Oh well, simple fix. There we go. We spoke briefly about this now, automatically adding those pixels, because being I would expect pixels. I'm sure some developers maybe wouldn't. Before we get into that, do you run analytics on the app so you know what people are typing and various things like that? apps are not my world at all, so I don't know how they work and all the
Yeah.
rest of it. But
Yeah.
do you know how people are using that app?
We don't. We don't.
Mm,
We don't collect that sort of thing. We do push out updates, but we don't
yeah,
really collect
collect.
a lot back in feedback in that way. But yeah, I agree.
It would be interesting to see, like, what is the most common, thing that
Yeah.
people are putting into there. Because yeah, maybe pixels, but if 70-80% people are using pixels, that might be the automatic kind of thing that gets put in various different circumstances. I mean, I know we're very much moving away from pixels now, and then there's a ton of different ways that you can, using VMs and VW, sorry, REMs, all that kind of stuff to get your thing. But yeah, it was just kind of, again, an embarrassing moment. I put 20 or something like that and just
Yeah,
clicked
and
enter,
it
thought it
just
was going to do its thing, but then, didn't. Again, a few moments.
yeah,
Like,
but
oh,
I mean,
okay.
in that case where people do enter a unitless value, maybe it is a pretty good idea to
Mm,
say, okay, we're just gonna push out pixels, or you know, potentially do something a little smarter as far as in the settings,
mm,
or even so. The other thing that we're working on that we are very cognizant that is something that's up and coming and needs to be better handled within Pinegrow is CSS variables.
mm,
And CSS
mm.
variables are really, I think, a strong way to handle your typography. And, you know, obviously pixels is, and when you bring up the topic of filling in pixels, it's not just typography, but,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, uh, I think that if we, I think that there's a strong possibility that we're going to be able to look at things like the CSS variables that are set up, what units are being used there, and to be able to translate that down to what
Mm,
units get used within your
mm,
within whatever particular thing that you're using a little bit more.
mm,
So almost, you know, an AI like user interface where it anticipates a bit more.
mm.
But that's definitely something we're, you know, working in some ways towards.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that being a bit of a difficult thing to implement if you start, yeah, talking about
Yeah.
AI even in a rudimentary context, simple things,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult. And actually, I made a note on here to have a discussion about is variables, and
Yeah.
me coming from a lot of Webflow use, I was thinking of more swatches and color palettes. You
Yeah.
reminded me, yes, there are CSS variables, of course. That shows how the length of time I haven't developed a website for. But yeah, CSS variables are another way to do that. Maybe swatches create CSS variables or
Yeah.
something. It seems like an interesting thing to do because,
Yeah.
yeah, actually, I forgot. This is a complete tangent, but something we mentioned right at the beginning of the episode. Um, I actually describe front end developers as in two camps, right? And you, at the beginning of the episode, you described one camp of front end developers. This is like my theory now, right?
Okay.
One side of the front end developer is very visual, very pixel perfect, can see
Mm-hmm.
when paddings are off and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
With the advent of like React and Vue and all this logic being brought to the front end, what what that's done, I think it's because of these front end application. What that's done is a whole new group of front end developers has come on the scene that are very logical, typical kind of back end developer methodological. I don't know. I'm terrible with words.
Methodologists.
Methodologist. Well, yes, methodical. Methodical is the word I was
Yeah.
looking for. Very methodical, and they will just not see that their web page looks like trash. The amount of times like a visual person needs to. Well, yeah, but there are people, but you don't necessarily call yourself a front end developer, right? You
Right.
said you were more in
Right.
the back end camp, but there are people that call themselves front end developers, but what they're actually really good at, and it's not a criticism, it's just a recognition that there are two different trains of thought that's going on in a front end developer's mind. Um,
Sure.
I've gone way off top. It's because we went on that tangent. I've forgotten why I brought that up, but it's just maybe an interesting. I don't know what the conversations are happening at Pinegrow, but then maybe there's just an interesting conversation around swatches / variables.
Yeah. So one way you can sort of see the evolution of our thinking at Pinegrow with respect to that is, and I don't know how much you've done with anything besides the plain HTML end of the or framework system, and the UI and the visual, or in the case of Bootstrap and Tailwind, you do a lot of the styling through the properties.
Yes.
At any point, both of those frameworks right now very much have that swatch mentality built in, where you can basically add in, a sort of set of base colors, and it will generate, different hues from those as a selector panel. So rather than just being limited to, whatever your 4, 5, 6 basic colors, it gives you a whole big panel. That same, so basically Tailwind kicked that off. That had to be sort of developed for Tailwind. That was further developed from base Tailwind to being able to customize Tailwind. And then that idea of building up basically themes, where you can pick different themes that are going to have different base colors and then hues. That has made its way to Bootstrap, and sometime, hopefully the next iteration, that same swatch idea is going to make it over into the plain HTML as well. Or basically, I shouldn't even say the plain HTML. It'll be, framework independent. It'll just be whatever framework you build up, you'll be able to access something like that.
That sounds really
that's
exciting.
something that we've very much been working on.
Yeah. Because I'll be honest, I haven't used CSS variable. I always kind of forget about them. One of the reasons why, I went straight to the swatches as opposed to the CSS variables. But you're right, and that seems like it would be an interesting challenge to try and solve. With regards to all that. So.
Yeah, but no, that's very much. The one thing that I don't want to, or I hate continuously doing is saying, "Oh yeah, we thought of that, already made." It's when the proof is in the pudding. The pudding is still plain vanilla. I don't care if you say it's going to have sprinkles. It doesn't have sprinkles. So I hate to keep giving that answer.
Yeah. Do you guys have a like an open Trello board or anything like that where you've got the features that you've got in the to-do list? A few companies do it, but it's an interesting way just to see what their product is or their ambitions are as a product. Do you have that at all?
We don't.
Yeah.
I have to admit, a lot of the ideas of where the product is going really are in Matcha's mind. Sometimes everybody, he's very open to suggestions. He's very open to dialogue about what we think is a good direction. But I have to respect that the fact that he's used to working with a small group and used to sort of being, the one who thinks it up and implements it and, thinks of the next thing. And he really wants to make sure that he doesn't overcomplicate the product to the point where he loses control. But that is something that we're thinking about more as the product kind of does get much more complex. I mean, in the past year and a half, we've brought on interactions. We've brought on Tailwind as a framework. So we've added a lot in just the last little bit that, at some point your product gets to a tipping point where you really do have to plan a lot more closely what the next thing you're going to develop, where you're going to place priority. But right now we just, everybody is, whenever they're working, they have Slack open and we're constantly just talking about and sounding ideas off of each other. sometimes it works. We're in different time zones.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But
yeah, I mean, it sounds exciting though, just to be in a world where, or in a company where, you know, if an idea is just sprung up in your mind and it's just a simple Slack message away for someone to actually implement it. It sounds exciting, and I think that startup culture is obviously something people admire, or not admire, but it's something people sort of, you know, dream of, sort
can
of
desire.
thing.
Can desire.
Yeah, you know,
Can.
yeah, and the open Trello board is not necessarily a right or wrong way. I just thought it was an interesting sort of way to demonstrate not even a product roadmap, but just, you know, people in forums raising an issue, and then and instead of like, you know, being completely bewildered, they can check the product roadmap. It's already in there. Oh, I want this feature.
Yeah.
Well, it's already a card. Not a right or wrong thing. It might not be right for everyone, of course.
No, and that is something. So on our forum, we do have a like features request.
Yeah.
And one thing that we do get press back on about that, I'll be completely honest, is that people don't feel like we give enough feedback on that particular section of the forum, that we don't keep people quite updated as much on what we think is coming next. And you know, the other dangerous thing to having a roadmap, slightly dangerous thing to having a roadmap is, you know, if it's one of those things, if you overpromise or you think you can implement a feature easily that's going to be majorly breaking for other parts of your product, you know, then you've thrown that out there. You've made sort of a promise, and then you have to say, yeah, but well, and pull it back. And so that's something that we constantly wrestle with, is you know, making sure not to overpromise. And
you know, it's not a terrible thing to say, look, we pulled this card into you know, I don't know if you guys use Trello, but or whatever, you know, we took on this task and it didn't work out. You know, there's no harm in that, but it sounds like it's an additional overhead to say, you know, go back to that person, you know, right on that forum. But it does sound like there's a perfect opportunity for some automation there. You know, someone adds something to that thing, to that forum feed, automatically adds it to the backlog, moves it around, this ticket, you know. Anyway, that's just that's just automation gone nuts.
No, it is a good point. It is a good possibility.
Yeah. So this next one, I'm going to skip default values because I think we've talked about that. But this next one is it would be interesting to hear your thoughts, because now I've actually retracted on my thoughts on it because I'm more well versed. But it's around inline styles, which I can write here. And by the way, this is the default thing. So if I was to create, you know, a section here and start creating some styling, you know, giving it a background, you know, giving it some color, whatever, it's already creating it as an inline style. Now, in comparison to Webflow, it will create a class, and that's kind of that's it. It's as ugly as they are, div block 27. It creates a class and it encourages that class mentality. And actually, it wasn't until probably my second video, or just playing around with it for another few hours, that I realized, okay, create a class, blah blah blah, and then start adding my styles. And now when I create a color, it will be added to the styles. I obviously raised that as a issue, concern, or even just a comment, but I'd be interested to know what your internal thoughts are around the style versus inline attribute.
Yeah, sure. If you just really quickly add another inline style.
Oh, now you put me on the spot. What do I add? Let's go width 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
So now to the right there of is that the right? Yes. To the right of the style attribute of the inline style, where it's below where it says inline style, just up a little bit to the plus sign.
Okay.
If you click that, so now you can add whatever whatever, you know, class ID tag, whatever you want to add. You can either click, if you type within there, it will add the class. So you can, it gives you some power that way. So, again, this goes back to the sort of non-opinionated or non-forceful way of making you do things to a certain extent. And this is I must emphasize, a very small extent. We were also thinking about different, in addition to not wanting to place an opinion on how you use it, there is also we're leaving the overall platform open to using other frameworks where that inline styling is more important. Where you're looking at small snippets, small templates worth of code that you bring in, where your button is going to live in its own file, and this is going, and you're actually and a lot of frameworks are moving away from that. But at the time that this was put together, you're sometimes going to want those inline styles, or the framework prefers you add them as inline styles, which is kind of bizarre to think, but it's completely one of those things where we wanted Pinegrow to be relatively non-opinionated.
Yeah, no, and I get it. And I think I was coming into it, probably the last project I touched was a Webflow project. So I was on autopilot thinking that was going to be the case. And, there is absolutely some more that, many reasons why you would want to add an inline style. And it's just being intentional with that and knowing that, immediately when you select an element and start playing on a style, it's going to add an inline style. And just the moment the moment you're going to correct it. But I think maybe at the time, I was questioning it, or I can't even remember what I said in the video, but obviously it became up as a note, and that would be that, and that totally makes sense. We've got a comment, by the way, the real Bastique. Note, to be precise, we had Trello a few years ago. We exchange ideas and prepare possible features a little differently now. Live discussions, GitHub notes, and so on. So who's the real Bastique?
I can guess, but I actually don't know. I can guess.
Hi, guys. By the way, hi, guys. Little robot. I don't know whether that's a Twitch thing or whether that's maybe a clue to it is, but I mean, to the Trello thing, it's just whether it's public or whatever, it would be interesting to give people an insight of what is about to be developed or what is being developed, so they don't raise an issue about something that's literally ready to be shipped. I don't know. It's maybe a fun thing, one way to engage or whatever.
Yeah.
So I believe this next one is something you actually already fixed. There was a edit text error. My question to you is, why did that keep popping up so I could actually learn what it was? But actually you found that was an error? Text editing mode is on. Can't edit text to body element. Okay, no worries about that. Let's undo that. Wonder how that happened. So I've got my body here.
So it was a bug where I think I think this one wasn't so much an error as a feature. So
got you.
I think I'm trying to remember where this came up in the video right now, but so one of the thoughts that went into this feature bug is that if you were to bring in a block that had, say, a headline that's lorem ipsum plus some paragraph and some headings and whatever, there's a good chance that you're already going to know what content you want to go into those blocks. And rather than having to select this block, double click it to get the text editor to come up, edit the text, go to the next one, double click, it was easier if it always stayed until you told it not to be in text editing mode, to stay in text editing mode. So you could click on the first, put in the text, click on the second, put in the text, click on the third, put in the text. So since then, at least I think this is the one you're talking about.
It is.
Since then, we've pushed out a live, and I don't I don't remember if we've had a formal update to Pinegrow since whichever video this was. But we've put in a feature where at the end of the blue context menu that comes up when you're editing text, there's a checkbox, and you can decide whether or not that checkbox is clicked. It's either going to say, when I move on to the next item. So if you just put in a div and put in an H1 or something to
okay, so something with text, right?
Yeah.
This is not semantically correct, though, to the front-end developers. We've got two H1s here, and it's chaos. But yeah, so we've got a H1. Yeah. So I've got my H1 in there.
So go ahead and click on the text editing or whatever.
Just
the blue
up here?
context menu. Either on the text or on either one.
Mm-hmm.
So now if you look at the end of that new blue context menu, that checkbox right there allows you to either keep the sort of default value of leaving text editing on when you change elements, or to, when you change elements, turn text editing off. So that'll be remembered as you shift through elements. Whatever you pick the first time you do it will be remembered, either checked on or unchecked.
Got you. Yeah.
And so that's the way sort of we address that. I think that's what you were talking about for that comment.
Well, I mean, I can't remember the specific point in the video, but I can remember, because this is actually a direct result to the way I work, because I mean, I think I said it in the video. I like just dragging my HTML out, regardless of what the content is. I do my HTML and then I do my content. I'm not sure if anyone else is going to have the same issue, but I get what I sort of seem to remember, just because that's the way I work. I probably would have just been la-di-da, just adding all my elements in, and all the rest of it.
And maybe that's edited one bit of text, and then after that, everything was giving errors.
Exactly.
Like you can't edit that. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. And it's just because it stayed in that text editing mode rather than dropping out when you went to the next element.
Yeah. And I can imagine why some people will find that useful as well. So there we go. Mystery solved. Mystery solved. Cool. Next one we had was drop down. I think we spoke about this. A drop down to have pixel rem and all the rest of it. I think that just it encourages a slightly less daunting interface when you start to see these interactive elements. And going back to Webflow, you type you type CH as an example, and it will change the drop down to CH because it recognizes that you typing it also wants to, it changes the drop down. But you mentioned briefly earlier on around that. Is that a discussion that's happening, or decided against it?
That's decided for it. That's something that's currently being implemented, where you have that drop down with the different values that are possible for that particular CSS value. So that's very much something that's being implemented right now.
Nice, because I think it's a funny thing, but I'm me, right? And I sometimes I do like to play, and I think that adds an element of play. I don't know whether that sounds completely crazy, but
no,
just sometimes I'm in a type mode, sometimes I'm holding a cheeseburger in one hand, so I just want to click around and all the rest of it. And it just adds as a visual element. I think would be quite nice. So look forward to seeing that. because Pinegrow does have a fairly strong visual editor vibe to it. We actively encourage that, and we sort of, I guess, advertise that as a feature that, if you just want to play with your paddings, you can move this slider up and down and look at how it changes if you want to change a position or something. Yeah. Cool. This was a really weird one, and I couldn't understand this one. The elements created a runtime error. So if this is the one I was thinking about, this caused me, I had to restart the application because of this. And what had happened was I created an element and I saw a duplication of that element that was surrounded by like an orange glow. So what is that? What was going on there?
So that is a combination of uh, sort of not sort of a bug in the HTML parser within Pinegrow, and a little bit of user error.
Yeah.
And the user error is in that particular instance, I think the way that error originated, you had grabbed some text from another site or from
Yes, I
some
remember.
document and copied
Yeah.
it in. And what
And I
it
think I
ended
even
up,
commented on that as well. I think I commented on the fact, oh, I copied that and it copied the link or something. But yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
So what ended up happening is it actually, you're copying wherever you copied it to. I didn't catch this. Matcha caught this in your video. You had actually nested a paragraph element within a paragraph element.
Got you. Okay.
And for whatever reason, that threw the Pinegrow HTML parser just into an absolute fit. It wasn't able to say, this is simply an error. It was saying, oh, he must want some convoluted thing. And
Yeah.
we were off to the races with a whole, error stack.
Got you.
We think anyway, that's now been pushed out, that a fix for that has been pushed out, where it should instead give you just a more human interpretable straight up error of what happened there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was hugely a bug in the HTML parser of Pinegrow. Cross fingers, all fixed.
Because I mean, the fact that I restarted the application and then it was fine there was obviously a bug there, but I totally get, yeah, if I was dragging in a paragraph within paragraph or whatever, then
Yeah, cool. But it should, error out gracefully there, and rather than just shutting down your entire operation and making you restart, it should.
Yeah. This next one is more, again, about the intuitive nature. Similarly, we spoke about the flex style properties only really showing when you're dealing with a flex element and grid and all the rest of it. This one's around being able to place HTML inside of, so, for those learning HTML, you cannot put an LI outside of anything other than a UL or an LI. UL or a OL, meaning it's a unordered list or an ordered list. Yeah. So Pinegrow is able to just let me drag that LI wherever the hell I want and create all sorts of chaos.
Right.
I think that's maybe, and I don't know if you have an answer to that, but that's maybe another level of intuitiveness that I would expect Pinegrow to help me out on.
Yeah, I don't have any sort of canned response to that. I just I think the parser within Pinegrow, I think, does a fairly good job of checking for blatant HTML error, like unclosed tags or things like that. I must admit, I haven't fully dug into the parser code well enough to see, could we add on that extra layer of, at least I know in some cases it does, but in other cases it doesn't, an error message saying this is not legal, according to spec, this is not legal. That might definitely be something that we could do some improvement on. And it's something that I think we'd have to look into a little bit more closely. I have to admit that for plain HTML, I would like to see, rather than just like an LI element, I'd like to see the draggable blocks of code be a little bit more expansive. I think they're sometimes a little bit simpler. Like you said, if you drag an OL or a UL over, you're going to want an LI in there. And I think in some of those instances that just isn't true. You can drag that UL over, but it doesn't have anything in it. And so I think there's definitely room for improvement within our plain HTML elements and templates.
Yeah, and you're right. And thinking back to Webflow, when you create a list, it creates those items for you, because it creates 3. Sometimes you don't want 3, but it creates those for you. Maybe in my mind, I'm visualizing it as like levels of intuitiveness. One step would be sort of not letting you put an li in there. The second level would actually be, well, creating those lis for you. And then the third level would be just to the extent of Webflow, where it just literally creates a lot for you, you know, and I don't think Pinegrow would ever be a level 3. This is my terminology that I'm just making up as we talk at the moment, but you know what I mean? And maybe Pinegrow might dance around a level 1 or a level 2 intuitiveness.
I have to say, just, I mean, completely separate from the actual Pinegrow app. As I said, I'm, you know, sort of I do software development. And one thing I wrestled with this exact thing of level 1, level 2, level 3. I put together a plugin that brings another framework into Pinegrow, UI Kit. And, you know, I elected very much so this is sort of an open framework, sort of open source framework. There we go. I elected to basically use their examples from their documentation page, which in that case, they're mostly going to be, as you describe it, sort of a level 3, very sort of opinionated. So when you drag that list, it's already got their 3 tops, plus maybe even a divider and a, you know, 4th item or something. So that's the decision I made there. So far with Pinegrow, it's been sort of on the other end, the level 1.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I don't know if that's necessarily going to change, or we haven't really received a lot of feedback on that. Having said that, awful lot of people use either Bootstrap or Tailwind.
Interesting. Yeah. So what are they're dragging in blocks? They're dragging in pre-created sort of elements and stuff like that. See. Yeah.
Or using sort of the other component tabs within that library to bring in sort of more complete elements as opposed to the basic HTML.
Yeah, I'm on expert mode, I guess. Free form expert mode. I can foresee an interesting discussion if that does, you know, enter the world of Pinegrow being not even the word you used was opinionated, but to spec, like this idea of only dragging in LIs to OLs or ULs. I can foresee an interesting discussion around form elements, because I mean React and all these kind of frameworks, they allow you to build user interfaces. I mean, a plain HTML user interface is probably not the most efficient way to do things. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I'm thinking of like a dashboard. Imagine a login with a dashboard, and you got lots of drop downs. You got lots of like button presses. I mean, it's Pinegrow, right? You've got lots of form elements that aren't technically. I mean, technically, you would have a form wrapping around the whole page to be able to. So form elements should only go in a form, right? That's the spec. But with these new kind of applications, again, maybe this is only something that is enabled in the Angular JS section of the template of Pinegrow. But that, I think that would be that's an interesting decision that Pinegrow would have to make, because it's like, well, do we allow form elements to be placed outside of forms? I mean, buttons can be placed outside of forms, but I'm just foreseeing an interesting debate whether if this opinionated approach does come to fruition, that would be a discussion I can imagine. This was, I noticed in my CSS there were 3 hero classes created. I now know why. Well, actually, I don't remember specifically in that scenario, but I now know how I could probably recreate 3 hero classes and that to be written in the CSS file. If I create another hero class here, you know, it doesn't. If I say create, it doesn't automatically take me to the one that's already been created. Why I'm able to create 2 hero classes there. And then why the parser then isn't cleaning those up, even if I do have it here, why isn't then cleaning it up? That's the problem I encountered. What was your response to that?
So this is a little bit because Pinegrow likes to, again, give you sort of the ability to work through things how you want to work through. So if you go ahead and make another hero class, the thing that you can do now is you can differentiate that hero class from your others by going down to the visual editor. And then below the selector and media query in the visual editor, there's another button called media query. So now if you click on that, you can now assign whatever breakpoint you want to that particular instance of the hero class rule.
Yeah.
And so now it's going to drop out because maybe I guess you are on the right size screen, but it would drop out if you weren't on the right size screen. It wouldn't be shown in the active CSS rules.
Yeah, so, I don't have any CSS on there. That's why I wouldn't have done anyway. But I get what you're saying. Okay.
So that's the way. So you can create the media query either through the ellipsis that's to the right of the create when you're actually making the class. So there's a media query button there, just up. Yeah. Or you can add it afterwards by duplicate the rule and add it. The one thing that I actually submitted on the Slack channel my ideas about this because I do notice that people have this problem. I'd much rather see, rather than you having to duplicate or create another class and then add the media query, I'd prefer to see that if you have the existing class selected and then down in the visual editor, click on add media query, that it would automatically duplicate it for you. For me, that's a much more intuitive workflow. But right now, the way it works is you can duplicate your rule or create a duplicate rule. Doesn't necessarily have to have all the same property values underneath, and then add the media query to it.
And I totally get that. I mean, like there'll be times where I, normally very early on in the project, I must admit, but there are times where I create something and I realize I'm creating the desktop style and I want this to be a mobile first application. So then I've created all these desktop styles in the mobile. So then why not just be able to say, all that, add it in a media query. So I can kind of see why that is. And that makes perfect sense as a workflow. So then the question does, well, I don't think I've ever used any kind of export feature or anything like that. I don't know whether you have an export, but is there a process that Pinegrow has where you clean up then if you've clicked the export button? I don't know if I'm oversimplifying.
So I understand. I have passing knowledge of Webflow. So Pinegrow is generating, straightforward CSS, straightforward HTML, separate files, just like you would if you were coding out of any IDE. So the only way the only time that Pinegrow does sort of a cleanup for you is if you're using a preprocessor. So either SAS or less, which you can do from within Pinegrow. Then within the support, there's a settings menu that allows you to specify which browsers you want it to, prefix for if you need to, and also does some cleanup. But again, a lot of times, and this is something I've addressed because I see users struggling with it with an independent plugin, but really this company line is that you probably should be using some kind of post CSS or gulp or something like that to go ahead and when your project's done, go ahead and put it through that whole process to clean up, minify, combine sheets, things like that.
I get it. As you would on a hard coded project. You're not always going to know that you're creating. You've already created a class, and so a developer would naturally type out whatever. So a preprocessor would does solve
one of the things that just thinking about it that I should interject is that Tailwind in their newest version just introduced something called JIT, so just in time or something, which basically is a task runner that cleans everything up, prunes out unused classes, things like that. That's currently being integrated into Pinegrow. So that'll be an instance where you're not really using, a preprocessor, so to speak, but your end product will be cleaned up and reduced in size from things that you're not using.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be interesting. And like, I haven't explored too much the SAS and the less stuff. I noticed it was a kind of hack to get prefixes on certain stylings and things like that. So I played around with it, and it worked, right. So I've yet to venture into the world of that preprocessor or the J just in time processor. So
Yeah.
I haven't got much comment on that, but it does sound what I don't know how does it do it? Like, if it's not a preprocessor, is it a JavaScript post thing, or like,
It's,
do you know the
yeah,
technicalities of it?
are you talking about the JIT or just
JIT.
the JIT is, oh gosh, I was even reading about this, and now it's basically it's based off of post CSS. So it's in the context of Pinegrow, it's run on the Node background, and it's all JavaScript that is used to post process it.
Cool.
But some of the details I'm definitely missing right now.
Yeah, no worries. I think I demonstrated this to you, and I'm going to have to put my mic down a little bit. So if I type, actually Flex would be a terrible one, but if I was to type in something with just one result, if inline Flex wasn't there, to me the blue looks like it's highlighted.
Yeah.
Actually, let's maybe,
if you hover, it turns into a darker blue. But I agree with you.
Yeah. What would be okay?
The other thing that I think you brought up is that I think you brought this up, is that if you start typing, you'll suddenly get like the drop down will reduce down in choices to like only one that can match what you've typed, even if you haven't typed the whole thing. But then at that point, if you hit return, it doesn't fill in the whole thing. So like if you were to type, delete back a couple.
Yeah.
So yeah,
if I was to hit enter right now, I'd expect it to go.
It would have stat. It would say stat. And yeah, we've actually been talking a lot on the Slack channel about the best way that we think to handle it. What's the most intuitive? Do you need a darker blue highlighting to appear once you've typed enough to match one of them, so that you can just hit tab? Does it make sense if there's only one choice like this, that you would then hit return? We've been having some discussions, because you brought up something that, that's kind of low hanging fruit. Yeah. And I think would make the user experience a lot better. Yeah.
Google Suite do it quite nicely. They give you like a faded out version of the rest of the word. And I think now they've probably, because I noticed it just the other day, because this feature has been out for a couple of years now, this auto-filling thing. If you're on a Google Doc, they actually add like a little tab icon to know that if you press tab right now, it would fill in the rest.
Fill in the rest. Well, that's pretty good.
I only saw that just last week, and I wonder if they've received user issues around that feature, that people aren't engaging with the autofill as much as they. I mean, once I saw it, I was latching onto it. I need to press tab or whatever. But maybe there's some inspiration or some learning that can be done the way that Google are doing it. But
that's a great suggestion.
It would be nice. Like again, even if, I don't know, my suggestion was, which seems a bit naive now we've spoken about it just briefly, is that all of these drop downs, they're a gray, or they're just a different color than blue. So then blue is the selection color. Blue is like, but I think there are probably better ways to solve that. But okay, so it sounds like you're contemplating what you can be doing there, just to be a bit more intuitive. So that
I like that idea of having the tab icon show up, like a grayed out tab icon at the end, or
it could look nice in this interface as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now again, this is another one of my crappy notes, but inherited style indicator. Oh, I know what this is. Do you know what this is?
I do. So basically, you want to be able to know that if you have a child element selected, you want to know what parents are kind of bringing styling on board. So what
Precisely.
styling is on the main that's sort of contributing to that hero content, right?
Yeah. So
I
if I
think
was to
basically.
say here, and I was to select maybe okay, yeah. So I've got a white selected. If I was to go to the span right now and went to color, I would see like a grayed out, just gently something to suggest
Yeah.
this is inheriting a white color.
Yeah.
Um, is there any talks on that that you guys are looking into, or?
Yeah, there has been talk. Again, I hate the whole thing. Proof is in the pudding. Yep, we've got
Yeah,
sprinkles coming. But yeah, this is
yeah.
something that Mach has been working on along with his updated visual editor display.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at first I was more thinking in terms of when you add a class, being able to see what else on the page is impacted, and that definitely is
Yeah.
there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable to be able to see where a particular style that you can't quite figure out, like where the heck is this coming from,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to see that visually would be a really nice addition, and that's something
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely working on.
Because interestingly, I think this goes back to one of my earlier points around decluttering, and this will
Mm.
make sense in just a second. Um, I'm seeing a lot of text boxes, right, in that user interface there, and um, if I've seen one, even if it's like I thinking back to Webflow, and they do some great things, but they do some not so great things. So I don't want to say that Pinegrow needs to at all become Webflow, but the
Yeah,
learning would be that I think they give you some indication when something is inheriting, whether
yeah,
it's maybe it's more explicit, like you're I don't know. I forget. I haven't used a lot of it, but just to if I was to see a color there that's maybe dropped back
mm,
in color or something, my
yeah,
brain is kind of telling me I can remove that worry, or you know, I don't know. It sort of feels like my brain would either know to lock onto that because that's the one that is filled, or it knows to kind of ignore it.
yeah.
I'm talking deep
So
psychological
no,
things
no,
right now
no.
that
Yeah, so actually, we've gotten some user feedback sort of about this feature, and
mm,
and more specifically, when you have some kind of media query selected. So if you have your hero class at a
mhm,
different media query,
mhm.
people were saying, okay, I want to know that if I'm doing whatever mobile first,
Yeah.
right, that I have a certain width coming over that is something I'm going to want to change.
Mm,
Yet the color, I'm not going to care to change. So I can see, okay, it's already set. I don't have to worry
yeah.
about it. So,
Yeah.
connection between your different media queries to know what is set at a different breakpoint versus so that you might want to address it. Like, oh, I didn't realize on that breakpoint I had, decreased my font size or something.
Mm, yeah.
That's the other thing that we've been sort of looking at, like how to best telegraph, because of course if you have multiple breakpoints, do you have to harvest across all of them? Yeah, I guess you do,
Mm,
maybe. Or do you only harvest the ones that are maybe going to apply to it still gets a little
mm.
complicated.
I guess it comes down to specificity, really. But
Yeah,
that sounds like a brilliant use case for knowing that it's being inherited. It's almost like a warning in some ways.
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah,
sounds
yeah.
great. This is a specific comment around a specific time stamp. Why mobile style disappeared at 57 minutes? Did you have a
Yeah,
response to this one? Oh, cool.
yeah. So if you have, go ahead and open up a different screen, a second screen, just by clicking at the top of the page view
This one here.
plus there. Yeah. So one of the things that people, so there's a little paintbrush to the right side there, and I think that very easily gets ticked. So if you go up to the right side of the page view of the extra small page view,
This thing. Yep.
yeah. So that states that only active rules that are active for that screen will show up. Whereas if you
Mm,
tick the left one above for the large screen or whatever
yeah.
size that is, only active rules for that one will apply. And
Mm,
people get tripped up because you can select items from either page view and it's not necessarily going to change that paintbrush. And so people sometimes get tripped up with wait, which one is the styling, which one is the element?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've gotten user feedback on, but we're still not sure what is a better user experience or better
Mm.
indicator. I don't know if changing that paintbrush to green, some
Mm.
more visually striking color that says I am the one to go.
Mm.
But it seemed like in watching your video that that's what had happened, is that something
Probably.
got selected that changed the paintbrush, but made you think you were still working on the oval size.
Because the other thing, and I'm fascinated by UX and things like that, because the other thing to bear in mind, if you were to, you know, obviously this is talking about infinite budgets and infinite staff, but what would be interesting is to match what the user, where the user is looking. And, you know, because I touch type, so I don't look at the keyboard. Am I looking at my design, or am I looking at the style panel? And what, you know, give me 100 scenarios where I make that mistake. Where am I looking to where the mistake is made? Is that occurring when I'm looking at the style panel down here, and that's when the confusion starts? So maybe the UI change or the UI kind of suggestion needs to happen in the style panel, because you know, if I'm looking at the window when the mistake happens, then the UI change needs to happen in the UI window. In the preview window, or something like that. But that's just me dreaming. And
no, that's a good point. Actually, can you do me a favor, because I've never actually done this? Can you click on the extra small paintbrush? I just want to see what happens to the visual editor. Okay, it doesn't. I don't know how helpful it would be, but to have that at the very top where it says, you know, it gives you that media query, scroll back up the visual editor, you know, right below there. I don't know if you have a style selected, if the breakpoint will appear there. The only problem that I have with that, though, is you can easily scroll that out of view. So even if that changes, you're still not going to pick up on that. So
I mean, you've got a fixed thing here, but
But
then you're cluttering, aren't you? And it's just
yeah.
But that makes sense, and maybe it's it's it would be interesting to know how to solve that. Again, these are just some of these things are UI sort of tweaks and issues, and so this final one then. So this is me save. I think I had some trouble, again, another embarrassing moment where I had trouble saving my project. I didn't know where that thing was saved to. So retracing my steps, I think I had saved this, just blindly saving it. I don't think I ever chose a folder. I don't know why it ended up in the template folder, but whatever. I think the problem I had was I saved my project, couldn't find where it was, so I was like, okay, I'm just going to save it again, and then I put it in another folder, and I think that just saves the HTML file or something like that. And I sort of wish there was a collect all files, collect everything, and put it to where I'm saving it. So similar to After Effects. I think After Effects does that.
I don't know if there's any thoughts, or there hasn't been really any discussion in that way. The one thing there has been discussion about is one thing that's sort of, I don't know, user interface standard that isn't really in Pinegrow is you don't have a good way from the project panel to go ahead and see the breadcrumbs of where things are saved. So you can see the parent folder, but you can't sort of like click on the parent folder to figure out where that parent folder is saved.
Got you, yeah.
And so there's been discussion of putting in a better breadcrumb system for, you know, where files are saved. I don't think we've really talked about being able to retrieve and relocate files necessarily.
Yeah.
But you know, having a little bit better file save interface would probably be better.
I mean, again, I'm not an app builder or anything like that, but why have we got file, edit, page? Why are these in the app window? Because I feel like if you were to use the native OS X or the OS system to do file and all the rest of it, that you would get that breadcrumb, because that's in the native save dialog. I think you might have to turn it on. I'm not too sure, but just out of curiosity, why are these menu items in the window?
Just a function of NWJS and a function of how to sort of easily build out that application. So
okay,
NWJS and such is going to require a sort of an extra layer in order to put stuff up in that top menu bar. If you look, I mean, basically the page you're looking at right now is a web page, right? So each of those items along the top, the drop-down menus, are just exactly that, drop-down menus on a web page. So if you were to open a Dev Tools, you would see that each of those are just a Bootstrap 5, Bootstrap 4, Bootstrap 3, one of the bootstraps, just a Bootstrap nav component with each of those items. So basically, it's just a function of how NWJS is operating. That's sort of made those menus where they are.
Got you. Which actually is a really interesting segue to another point that I was discussing with Emmanuel, who was, forget the nickname, the real Bastique.
I figured.
Yeah. I discussed with him a web editor. And maybe I've missed the boat or something, but you mentioned this is just essentially a website that we're looking into. Do Pinegrow have in the pipeline any kind of web editor where you can go to app.pinegrow.com and then you can access your website through that?
To my knowledge, no. I don't believe so. The closest thing that we sort of have for that is, if you notice from when you're creating a new on the sort of home screen, like if you close this project out, there's actually,
I don't know how to do that actually without closing
just
Pinegrow.
File, and then close project up a little bit.
Close project. There we go. I don't want to save. There we go. Yep.
So from this page, you can see the third icon over, the third big icon in sort of the gray area, is Open URL. That allows you to open any site you want. And basically, it will then allow you to do local edits and saves, and then re-upload that to whatever site you want that to go to. So there's some limitations. It's better. There's another Pinegrow product called Snapshot that allows you to basically clone all the resources of a page. This one sort of lets you get the main HTML and CSS resources. I don't think it saves down like the JavaScript and some other things, or the images. But it basically, actually it might do the images. It allows you to basically recreate a local version of your web page, edit it, and then you can push those changes up to your website using an FTP or however you normally populate your hosting. So there is that, but there isn't a online live sort of site editor available.
Because Emmanuel had some good responses and some valid responses, and ultimately it comes down to the product vision and the statement that Pinegrow wants to make, and ultimately it's a different tool to Webflow. I did mention around design tools such as Sketch were king. They were cream of the crop when it comes to design. But in the new kind of COVID world, they've lost a huge amount of market share, and people have just latched on to Figma because it's collaborative, it's online. I don't need someone to, I mean, design is different because it deals with files, but I don't need someone to own Sketch to view my Figma project, for instance, or maybe make edits or whatever. And I just feel like it's a direction that the world is going into, and it's still an open question. It's still not it's probably not an easy answer or an easy solution, but how Pinegrow might lend itself to submitting to that, the kind of the way the world is, while maintaining their product vision,
Yeah. Yeah.
and doing what it does best, and still being able for you to work with actual files, as opposed to Webflow being completely black box. You don't know what
Yeah.
it's doing, how it's doing it. You can't do any sort of server manipulation. How all that plays together is an interesting thing. So do you know if there's anything regarding the web editor or any considerations towards it?
I don't believe so. As you said, I think one of the things that we sort of tout about Pinegrow is the fact that you don't necessarily have to be attached to any kind of internet connection to be able to do things.
Yeah.
I don't know if sort of a hybrid where you can both work offline or work online could easily be done. I don't see that as a priority in the whole development, but I do appreciate, what you're saying, that it would be nice to maybe have easier ways to collaborate on a single project. There's, I think that's a bit too in depth. I mean, there are some ways that you can facilitate that, but they're a little bit complex. Just dropping back for 1 second though,
Sure.
The one thing that I do like, and again, this was sort of how I was brought on, I do like the fact that with Pinegrow, you can fairly easily, if you know any JavaScript, really extend the heck out of it. So you can really easily, if you're within an agency, you can really easily set up some plugins that, are going to push your pages on a schedule, on a demand, whatever, up to a central server that, other people working. So you can set up your own versioning system. In other words, you can do things like that. It's, like I said, if you know some JavaScript, it's a really good environment to extend. So I think, that's an area that I think we have to explore a little bit more and, really let people know about.
Yeah. I mean, what I was going to say as well is that Git is obviously the de facto thing. When Sketch was, Figma was kind of coming in, I know my girlfriend used Abstract. She was a Sketch user. Used Abstract, and that was version control for design software. Figma then just completely eradicated all that need for any kind of version control. But for code, which makes way more sense for coders and developers and engineers, they're using Git version control system. And to your point around extending it, well, if you've got a JavaScript developer that's able to build a plugin to do all that, well, they're probably able to use Git anyway. So maybe it's
but if you're in an agency where you have 5 designers and 1 backend guy, that backend guy can say, okay, look, all of you guys, now I've implemented this function, just load your plugin, click up here, version away. So that's sort of where we see that section of it hopefully going. Is a little bit more traction that way.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, because I was going to ask a question. Does Pinegrow have any integration with Git, like VS Code would do? It tells you what branch you're on. It can do all that kind of stuff.
So the answer is no, in a way. The one thing that Pinegrow does have are plugins already that allow it to interface with Visual Studio Code and with Atom. So you can actually go ahead, hook your project up to either of those, make changes within that external code editor, and it'll show up fairly live in the Pinegrow editor at the same time. And so then one thing that you can do is step back and go ahead and use the versioning that's within those two. Shameless plug that you can edit out of the of your show is, right now, I sort of inspired by you. I've started live coding, And what I
Cool.
selected to live code is actually a GitHub interface using the GitHub API so that you don't have to leave Pinegrow. You can just go ahead. There'll be a GitHub menu that you can create a repo, push to a repo, things like that. Not supported by the official Pinegrow team, just little old me putting this together and sort of showing people live code at the same time as I bumble my way through putting this particular plugin in.
That was brilliant. It was so interesting. It was great to just nerd out on a bunch of different things and get some stuff answered, and just try and bumble our way through an interesting conversation. It was really
it was
cool.
Enjoyable on this end as well.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you next time I stream.